I forgot where we went. Oh, there we go. So I guess the silence means we'll start now anyway. We usually get going around 9:05, and I think since we've been getting going around 9:05, people started to assume, well, we really start at 9:10. And if I did a little quick projection, by next January we would be starting when the class ends at the current rate. So we'll starting at 9:05 again, and then we'll either see a natural adjustment, or I'll try not to say anything relevant for the first 5 minutes, which is probably true anyway. So it all works. It was all working out. Well, I hope you had a great Easter week, and are enjoying the new spring weather between pollen and rain. Hopefully it's going well for you. I did say that we would finish some of the discussion from last time, because it was, again, as usual, getting going really, really well at about 10:15, and I didn't want to cut off anything that we were talking about last time. And then what we will also do is roll back into our list of topics, some of which we've hit, some of which we have not. And so we can pick what we want to do for the remainder of the time and in the coming week or two. So be ready with your vote in mind if you already have one. If not, you'll see the topics that are kind of left. And there's nothing that says that topic list must be run through, so if you've got something else you want to propose, please do. I think we had hit a lot of the core issues of what we intended to talk about when it came to gender and sexuality and Christianity. In a sentence, it was something like, if anything, it was, God has a plan and purpose for individuals, period, and then he also, which you want to know, because it's what will make you the happiest, is fulfilling God's plan and purpose for your life. If you want to do the statistical analysis part, you can say things like, God has a plan and purpose for categories and roles. He wants men to do the following things. He wants women to do the following things. He wants animals to do the following things. He wants plants to do the following things. God may have some broad intent that you could talk about, but then there's also some specific stuff. You might say, to be not too controversial, maybe God's will for plants is to grow and flourish, but his will for one particular fig tree was to get wiped out all at one time. So you can't turn around and say, as Joel Osteen does, God's will for your life is to be maximally rich and happy in this life. That may be true of other fig trees, but it wasn't true of that one fig tree. And does that mean that God has to make these categorical statements? He can't make individual statements? I think not.
I don't like that comparison, because that means some people are just meant to dry up and wither.
Well, you'll probably have seen the Demotivators poster that says, the purpose of your life may be solely to serve as a warning to others.
Yeah.
That's
one of my favorite ones.
So the thing I'll put that, to make that less depressing and demotivating, imagine the following. I mean, think about the person that you love the most in this world, whoever that is, whether it's a husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, daughter, son, mother, father, whomever. If it's the case that God told you, do you love this person? Yeah, I really do. More than anything else? More than anything else. More than your own life? More than your own life. What if I told you that just the way that their will works, the only way for them to come to heaven and to be with me and to be with you in the long run is if your life actually turns out to be fairly miserable, because a bunch of stuff that they do and that other people do to you serves as that purpose that, on the last week of their life or their deathbed or halfway through their life, they're like, you know what? Here's a lesson I learned from this person after they've died horribly. I will now choose to serve God, to be with God. Would you make the choice? Yes. All of us in our noblest moments would probably say, of course I would do that. It's harder sometimes in the moment to agree that that's the case. But if you would say, yes, I would be willing to suffer so that the person I love most would make the right choice. That is what I'm talking about. That is, I think, what God does. And I think ultimately that's what Jesus did. I think everybody should ask the question, why did Jesus come when he did? And maybe more specifically, why did he die the way that he died? There are some horrific methods of execution in ancient history and some not so ancient history. But at least in the top 3, and arguably the top 1, of the most excruciating way to die, note excruciating uses cruciato as the base word or some form of it to even evoke the idea, the feeling. Did he have to die, in order to die for our sins, did he have to be crucified? You know, I don't think that's the case. It's not the case that all of us rate crucifixion. You know what I mean? We rate death. We don't necessarily rate, it's not that we have to die by crucifixion. God didn't say, if you do not obey me, if you sin, if you break the following commandments, if you whatever, then you will be crucified. In fact, the method of execution, typically in the Old Testament, was stoning to death. So why did he have to be crucified? There's no super solid known orthodox answer to that one, but I might suggest this. There is something to be said for when you find yourself in life saying, no one can possibly understand how I'm feeling. Then you can say, well, there's one guy. If God himself did this and he died the worst possible way, even if you're dying the most torturous possible death, you can be like, actually, God knows exactly what I'm going through right now. I forget which lady's Holocaust survivor went through it, but she and her sister, it may have been Corrie ten Boom, but don't quote me on that, they were being shepherded naked into what turned out to actually be showers, not a gas chamber. And she was trying to cope and deal with all this stuff. And she had a sudden realization and looked over at her sister and said, he was naked too. And because she was feeling, ashamed and dehumanized and all that kind of stuff. And she realized, actually, we have a Lord who understands exactly this, because you're nailed to the cross naked as well. So I don't know why exactly, but some of that might be the case. So I would suggest that as if you feel you're a good person, or let's say better, if you feel that you are a Christian and you're obeying the Lord as much as you seem to really be able to at this point in life, or maybe very well, and you're also suffering, it may be, and probably is, the case that God is doing that for one of 2 purposes, either to bring somebody else into relationship with him, or alternately, it may be to justly condemn those who are actually evil. Because if you do want to screen out the actually evil people before they go to heaven, if you want to be able to judge them, they need to do stuff, they need to demonstrate that evil. And if you happen to be the object of that evil, then you're at least part of God's justice system, and he will the idea here is that he will give you proper justice eventually. Maybe to the point where you're like, oh, well, I didn't necessarily mean that I wanted those people to be completely destroyed or go to hell forever or whatever, however it works. You know what I mean? So just something to consider, but that was a long answer to a short point. All right, what other questions do we have about this stuff, comments?
So the thing that I was thinking about is because it kind of, to tie this to the talk on homosexuality and kind of sexual, what is being male and female, and then male and female roles, stuff of that nature, or tendencies or whatever. It's such a loosey-goosey thing at this moment. But the concept that somehow that man and woman were made in God's image. They, I don't have the exact phrase, but they made that, so somehow I take it that God has a male-like attribute set, and he has a female-like attribute set. And somehow there was a purpose in putting man and woman together as a reflection of who he is, and maybe even in the concept of having marriage as several layers of reflections of things. And so I think that it's worth, I don't have the answer, I'm just kind of throwing this out as like, hey, it's just been something I've been thinking about, because we think of God maybe as him, like, what does that mean?
Yeah, I think I think that's a good way to think about things and to call out some of the specific issues we're talking about. You may remember a couple weeks ago we talked about God using images, both male and female images, in conjunction with himself. He has characterized himself. Jesus says, talks like a mother bird or hen gathering her chicks under her wings kind of thing. And nobody's offended by the fact that Jesus identifies in some way with a female poultry. That's not, the idea here is not, well, I think we can probably say, as the angels are neither married nor given in marriage, that the biological trait of having male or female sex organs or male or female chromosomes does not apply to spiritual beings. That, at least that part doesn't. So the question is there something, is the only thing that it is to be male or female to be biologically male or female? Not necessarily, right? What if there are, as I think I brought up Tolkien's Silmarillion thing, where he's got these spirits that are supposed to be like angels, basically, these angelic figures, who he said, based on some of who they were as a person, when they took physical forms, they took forms as male or female, big giant beings or something like that. And it had to do with something intrinsic about who they were. And this is fiction, of course, it's mythology. But the idea that Tolkien's bringing up is there something that we would typify as female? Well, if your definition of what it is to be female is solely, or male, is solely biologically defined, then you can't even apply that category to something spiritual, because it does not appear to be the case that there are chromosomes to a soul, if we have souls, right? So we have to say, what are the sets of traits that we want to allocate to male? What are the sets of traits we want to allocate to female? One of my reasons for reading Proverbs 31 appears to have been, in retrospect, a lot of the things that we would turn around and say, these are male traits based on what we have been through historically and where we are kind of modern terms, were descriptors used of women. Business person, strength and honor, all the stuff that seems to be, if I gave you a list and said, parse these into male and female traits, you would have put a lot of those on the male side that were ones that God uses or Solomon uses to describe the ideal woman. So what I might say to you is, we like to think categorically. We are promiscuous and out of control categorizers. In fact, when you want to criticize biology as a discipline, if you're some other discipline and you're trying to pick on biology, you call them glorified classifiers. You guys don't actually do anything, you just sit around and classify things, You draw these lines, you say you're finding commonalities and you're putting categories out there, but these are all fictional, right? There's nothing that says this family, this clade, this species, this genus has some ontic difference amongst them that is something other than where we chose to draw the line. That is to say, we drew a line here between wolves and coyotes, but it could be that we shouldn't have drawn the line on the other side of the coyote or on the other side of the wolf or the other side of the subspecies of wolf or something like that. So I think that what I'm trying to say is, despite the fact that we are dying to categorize everything, here's a fundamental truth. Sexuality is expressed on an individual basis, not a group basis, right? You don't join a group of people and say, we are male. We are going to have sex as a male. You are an individual that chooses to have a relationship, that chooses to have a regard for yourself as either male or female on a single individual basis. Okay, if that's true, and I'd say fairly obviously is, then what it means is you have to consider what your individual role is there. And if you're going to ask, why do I engage in sexual behavior? Why do I engage in relationships that are typed, that have a partner that is either another man or a woman or a man, depending on what gender, what sex you are, what gender you are? What is going to make me happiest, right? We don't get married to somebody being like, let's give this a shot. I mean, if you do, that's a terrible reason to get married. What you typically do is say something like, this is the best person in the world and I want to marry them. Or maybe if you're more pragmatic, like me, you're like, I'm batting so far, ended up so far above my league that with Tracy, it was kind of like, there's no way I would ever end up with a better wife than this, so let me see if I can trick her into marrying me. And and maybe very cynically we might say something like this. It could be that as we look out among the 100 people of the opposite sex we know, for heterosexuals, we say, this would be the person I would like to marry the most, this would be the person I'd like to marry second most, this would be the third, but I probably can't really bat above 17. So I'm going to pick number 17 because I can probably convince 17 to meet me. Right? So that's a very cynical way of looking at it. Maybe that's something like what we do. But at the end of the day, nobody says the following: I could probably get 17 to marry me, but what the heck, 82 is right down the road. I'll just marry 82. We don't do that. We typically marry the person that we think is the best possible person that we can cajole, trick, or convince to marry us.
I love how you reduce marriage to quant.
I'm trying to. That's my best. Yeah.
I'm nerding out with you. A few thoughts. First being, like, we talk about, the Bible says, that we're made in God's image and stuff like that. And I think there's a tendency in interpretation of that to get wrapped around the axle of, like, male, female, like, whatever. Like, maybe I'm off here, but I think, like, when it talks about we're made in God's image, it was, like, humans are made in God's image. Not that God has, like, hands and feet and all that other stuff, right? But, like the essential part of us.
Okay, so hold that for 1 second. Let me finish this point and then come back to it, because this is a critical point that maybe lies at the very heart of what we're talking about. The reason I made the point about who we choose to marry is when we choose to marry someone, when we choose to be in a relationship with someone, we are trying to make ourselves as happy as we can possibly be, yeah? That's the reason that you marry 17 instead of 82. You're saying this person is likely to make me the happiest. And when you say this is the best person that I can find to marry me, what you're really saying is this is the person that will meet my needs and I will meet their needs, and we will live in a love relationship because I think living in a love relationship is what will make me happy. Under the foundation of all of this is I think this is going to make me happy. That's the reason seems to be the reason that we do a lot of this stuff. So if that's your reason for doing it, to me, all of what we've said so far is the following. If you have homosexual leanings and tendencies, what God is saying is, and let me follow this up with a heterosexual example as well, you will not be the happiest you can be fulfilling that. Not saying that you won't have some level of happiness, in the same way that if you married 82, you would have some level of happiness. But you won't be as happy as if you married 17, and maybe you wouldn't be as happy as if you married 1. Now, the problem with the ranking 1 through 82 or 100 is, if my own experience is any good, we're terrible prognosticators of what will make us happy. Like I've said on multiple occasions that if I'd went to the factory and ordered a wife, a human wife, like I would have built one and specified properties and personality traits and all that stuff, very different from Tracy. Having married Tracy, I've realized post facto, and not some sort of opposite of buyer's remorse, whatever that is, but like genuinely, sincerely, there are things that Tracy is a person that fulfills all kinds of needs, desires, everything that I have that I in no way could have possibly anticipated because of my lack of experience in what it is to be a father and what it is to be a husband and what it is to be a man in these following relationships and in situations in life. So, we should laugh at our own mental rankings if you happen to do something like that. But my point is, we do things because we think they'll make us happy. To the homosexual, I would say the following: that's not going to make you as happy as you can be. Now, the homosexual might counter and say, well, I can tell you what is a non-starter for me is even being attracted to the opposite sex, in which case I would say something that's very hard to swallow, which is it may be that not being sexual at all is going to make you happier than being sexual in this following case. Now, you could say, well, Scott, thanks for your opinion, it doesn't matter. And I'd be like, you're right, my opinion doesn't matter. The Christian, though, says that's the way that God says it. And if you think that God actually knows what will make you happiest, and you think that he has your happiness foremost in heart and in mind, then you should believe what he has to say. Now, to the heterosexual, I said it before, 3 weeks ago, you may be a guy or a gal that wants to sleep with multiple sexual partners. You may want an open marriage. You may want, just a crazy hedonistic lifestyle. And you may say to yourself, 20 is way better than 1. There's no way I would be happy with 1. I'm telling you, or that God is telling you, that that's not how it works. You will be happier with 1. And interestingly, for a quick tangent, because we're on a tangent of a tangent of a tangent anyway, there is not 1 for you. There doesn't have to be 1 for you. If you could pick anyone and choose to love them in a godly way, and you will have the kind of reward that you would expect to have from that, which is to say, a good one. Now, wisdom comes in here, and if you pick a person who is wise and loving yourself, then you are going to expect to see more of that coming back to you. If you pick somebody who's very difficult, you're going to expect to see more of that coming back to you. And the same, and you see the kind of the worst case of this, of God telling one of the minor prophets to say, go marry this prostitute. And she is his wife for a little while, and then she runs back to being a prostitute. And then he goes, like God does to Israel and to us, and brings her back into his household. Now, you may say, well, that's a terrible, terrible thing. But do you know what? That guy, that minor prophet, knows something that you and I don't know. What's it like to deal with a person deeply and intimately who leaves you and becomes a prostitute, and yet you love them enough to go back and get them? I don't know what that feels like experientially, but God does, and now this minor prophet does. So not all of us are tough enough for that lesson, and the one thing I say to people who are going through really, really difficult times is, that's God complimenting you, because apparently he thinks you're tough enough to take this kind of stuff. My life's been fairly easy. Maybe God's like, that's because you're not going to do too well if I stick you in more difficult situations. But all that to say, individual. We can talk categories all we want. This is always an individual question. And if you're a Christian, or if you're a Christian who's talking to someone who's struggling with anything about sexual identity, gender, personal behavior, heterosexual personal behavior, any of this stuff, the answer is always, what does God individually want you to do? Now, maybe it's the case because of a lack of communication you might feel between you and God, that you have to say, well, I'm going to go to the Bible and start to get some clues as to what that looks like. And that tends to talk in sense of categories. But you don't have to go to the Bible and look at it categorically. You can go to the Bible and look at the individual cases all the way through history and say, what was it like for the homosexual? What was it like for David, who married multiple wives? And what was it like for Absalom? What was it like for all these different guys? And you can see the lessons fairly bluntly painted.
So I don't know where to begin next.
And coming back to you on your point after Steve's comment.
It may relate to that. And what you were bringing up was exactly along the lines of the things I was thinking, in the sense that two things. One is that it seems that God in the Old Testament kind of used description of himself as being kind of, or as Israel, depending on which stage they were, Judah or the other one, escaping, was essentially adulterous, and that he was using like, hey, that suggests husband like some sort of relationship, because how could you be adulterous if you're not in that? I know that's imagery, but well, maybe it's more than that. And then also when you start talking Jesus as the bridegroom of the church, to think of the church as kind of more of a, if you will, feminine, in terms of a relationship. So if there's something more to that, in terms of fleshing out what it means to be masculine and what it means to be feminine, not only by males and females being created in the image of God, but how God uses feminine, masculine type language in describing groups of people and other people. So
Yeah, I think
where that falls. But
I think the thing that people tend to get bent out of shape about there has to do with the one passage in the Bible that seems to get ladies more bent out of shape than any other, which is and get guys to thinking the wrong things, wives submit to your husbands. It's this, okay, well, what it is to be feminine is to be in a role of submission. Is that actually what it is? I don't know the history of how that came to be the interpretation of what it is to be feminine, but here's a simple proof that that's not the case. A special operations trooper who, let's say that in a marriage that he says, okay, well, I'm in charge, and since because I'm male, I'm in charge, and because I'm in charge, therefore, it's really a male role, that's what I'm doing. Does he have a boss? Unless you're the president or the king, then you've got somebody else to whom you report. Does that make you the woman? Because you're submissive to your commanding officer? Obviously not, right? That's not the, other than that, then there's one guy in the whole military and everybody else is a girl. So if you've got this idea that being in a position of submission or subordination is a distinctly feminine trait, then you haven't thought about it very deeply. Or you think the military is a very different organization than the military thinks it is. So I would say what we have to do, we tend to say, well, that's got to be the case. Look, Christ is the head of the church and we're the bride. And so therefore that means one's in submission to the other. Remember what Christ did from the get-go was the first two. He put himself in submission to other people, in submission to the secular power, in submission to the Sanhedrin, and abided their judgment, their unrighteous judgment, the same of the Roman procurators and law, and washed the feet of his disciples. That is not commanding behavior, that is submissive behavior. Does that make Christ feminine? I think not. So, I think first you got to take out the idea of to be feminine is to be submissive. That does not comport with our own history. And what in a marriage, it does the idea that God talks about is that woman was made for man. Now, what does that mean? Let's talk on the biological side. It may be more like of these two people who are going to relate to each other. This was the first thing that I made. This was the first version I made, and the second version I made was to augment in some way this person, not for the purpose of this person is the important one and this add-on is some kind of accessory that we're adding to it. But when he built this one, he said, he looked at all his creation, he said it was good, and then after that he looks at this one and says, he saw that it was not good for man to be alone. That meant that he intentionally, let's assume that God did this intentionally, it wasn't like he built man and was like, ooh, that didn't work. I kind of forgot the other part of this one. Let me add on some stuff that in 2.0, the first version was a little buggy. Let's see if we can't make it a little bit better. The idea was these are two sides that are supposed to really be one flesh, that are joined together. And maybe to the point Steve's kind of been alluding to, maybe a better picture of God is what the union of two people of these two sexes look like. That's more what God is, who God is, than any one individual part of it. I don't know that you could make a airtight biblical case for that one, but I think there are enough verses in there that you could probably do something close to that. And then having done so, you might ask this question. Guys at the peak of your career, do you feel complete or do you feel like something is missing? And the short answer is, at least for the vast mass majority of guys, is no matter what you're doing, no matter how successful you are, no matter how in control you are, no matter how well things are going, you don't feel complete without a woman in there. You're a particular woman, that's your particular way. And I think it's the same in many ways for ladies. Not all guys, not all ladies. So as Jesus said, some are intended to live lives of relational solitude vis-a-vis the opposite sex, like that. But in the main, when you ask the individual case of most people, you're going to find that there's this hole in them. We like to say in Christianity there's a God-shaped hole in our hearts. God has set eternity in our hearts, and without that, we're not happy. Well, here on this earth, typically speaking, there's a opposite gender-shaped hole in our hearts. And one of the heartbreaking things about homosexuals is frequently they also have that opposite gender-shaped hole, and then someone turned around and told them, people, society, culture, all of us, convinced them that hole is of a different form than what it actually is. And we've convinced them that they're the opposite side, and so they try to fulfill it, and often to less than optimal solution.
So 2 points. One, not to get too zen, but what you're talking about there, there's a balance in harmony, right? It is a yin and a yang. That's how God designed it, right? And so they fit together perfectly. Biologically they fit together perfectly. The purpose of those biological sex organs is to procreate, right? To continue having children and stuff like that, which is why two women, two men, without scientific intervention.
Yeah, so we've got another point that we need to come back to you on. This is an important point right here. Let me just throw this out for consideration. We don't have to go down this. It shouldn't be lost on us that in order to have children, you can't do that on your own. Like God could have made it that way. Hey, you know what? I feel like I'm in a good place in life. I'd like a son, and I'm going to bud like a hydra. And then here's this kid, and here we go, right? And now I've got my own kid. Why would God have done it that way? And one of the possible answers to that is you're not good enough. You're not what a kid needs. You, man, are not enough for what a child needs. Now, there are a whole litany of reasons that may be the case, but let me point out that one of the reasons is not the case, one of the reasons it is not the case that you're not good enough isn't solely because we live in a fallen world. Maybe you could make that case. Well, guys have to hunt because there's not much, and somebody's got to take care of the house, and so this one's stronger and can throw spears further and shoot arrows further, and this one has got a more nurturing environment, personality or whatever it is, and here's the differences between the two, and this is why. We live in a fallen world. Okay, fine, I'd have taken that as a possible argument if God had not created Adam and Eve as male and female in a place where you didn't have to do any of that. Where walking around and picking fruit seemed to be the maximum amount of difficulty you're going to encounter when it came to generating food. So why was man not good enough to have kids on his own? It's because and we see this societally, sociologically today, single parent kids have a tougher time because there's something that they're missing from a demonstration perspective. Most of what kids learn, they learn from watching their parents, or if their parents abdicate some of that, not abdicate, if they delegate that to teachers and friends or whatever else, and they learn it from the people around whom they are. But a lot of that comes from them looking up to you as a mother and father. And so you have to have both in order for a kid to be raised in a way that seems to make them maximally happy, is at least some of the sociological evidence that we seem to have now that's being championed by certain fairly prominent figures.
Going back to your point about where you're like, hey, this is Scott's opinion, like take it or leave it, right? So like, I think too often we get into discussions or approach things like where there's this line drawn in the sand, right? As Christians, if I'm picking up everything that you're putting down, like we should, yes, you could be happy doing a non-heterosexual thing. You won't be as happy as God wants you to be. I still need to love you as a Christian. Where it gets sticky and where it gets controversial and political and all that stuff is like, okay, what about same-sex marriage? What about transgender bathrooms? All that stuff, right? And then we immediately like hearken straight to, okay, lines drawn in the sand, and that's where things get very acrimonious.
Yeah.
So it's important to remember that like, if we keep kind of our compass as, not to be cliche, but love the sinner, hate the sin.
Yep.
If we remind ourselves of that and not just go like straight to the picket lines,
Yes.
then we would probably need to be a little bit more productive.
Yeah, I agree with that. In fact, I would say it this way, and that was well said. I would add this only. We ought not, sometimes it's tempting to say, here's a person who is representative of this category. I disagree that this category is doing what it's doing in our society. Therefore, I'm going to treat them as a representative of that whole category. You can do that if you want, but they're going to feel like a representative of a category that they may not have signed up to represent. Instead, you should treat them as an individual. In both in the categorical sense and in the individual sense, homosexuality, rampant multi-person heterosexuality, fill in any, of all the things that you can do wrong sexually, remember that the list is just as deep on the heterosexual side as it is on the homosexual side. In any of these behaviors that are not godly behaviors, you will be, all of them are symptoms of the underlying problem. They are not themselves the problem. Societally, what we're seeing in society today, consider the following. Gender issues we've been dealing with with millennia. In America, in 2019, is the way that we're dealing with gender issues the same or different than it was 20 years ago? Different, right? We got all kinds of different. Some people would say crazy different. Some people would say new categories we've never even heard of. New changes of language we hadn't even considered would be a possibility. All that kind of stuff. Is it the case that this is some new thing arisen among humanity? Like, where did this come from? It's not that some new class of human being has been born in 2000, in 2015, in 2012. This is a symptom of what happens when any culture gets to a certain point. And if you want to look, and we in America, because we're kind of geographically isolated and isolated for a whole bunch of kind of media reasons and language reasons and all that other kind of stuff, it is not hard to see how this works. If you go travel in other places in the world, you'll find people who are pre this point in our society. You'll find societies that are pre this point in our society. You'll find societies that are post this point in our society. And you can see what it actually looks like in each of those societies. Now, these are not all homogenous and the same. And, you know, as it went in France, as it goes in Saudi, as it goes in Sri Lanka, so also will go here. There are a bunch of other differences. But this particular symptom ain't new. This has happened in a lot of other places. And you can go there and you can see what it looks like when you do things like that. And I would encourage people who are very much in the vein of like, yeah, we should allow all this to happen. Go see some of the societies that this has gone and see if that's really what you want with your society.
Yeah, I think when real problems are all solved, then people seem to get bored or something and just make up problems for themselves. And then the society just destroys itself because the society is strong enough to defend itself from outside threats. So people they have nothing better to do and make up problems for themselves. Really, I mean, all the societies that
Yeah, and
ancient history, like,
I'm tempted to make an argument that says something like, you know, how does a society get to the point where they routinely homosexually abuse small children? Because there are some societies out there where that's actually the case. They routinely do that. So, ancient and modern, some Southwest Asian and Middle Eastern cultures are like that even today. If that's, or some subcultures in there are like that. I want to almost say, well, look, this is how it happens. Instead of living in, when societies turn their back on marriage and then they, you know, kind of let those slacken a little bit, then you start to see the following behaviors. And once you start to see those behaviors, you start to see this behavior, and it kind of walks that way. Let me offer a counter argument to that one. Cain, Abel, they're out in the fields doing their stuff, and you know the sin we've had so far is like I choose not to trust God. I want to listen to myself instead of God. Okay, that's the one sin that we've had recorded before then. We'll put it off to the side for now. What's the next step after that?
That was a big sin.
Lying a little bit, you know, maybe pushing people around, maybe taking something, maybe stealing. No, what's the first step out of there? Wham, dead, murder. Excuse me? What happened to the we boiled the frog kind of thing? Apparently, in mankind, we can go from 0 to lethal, evilly lethal, in a heartbeat. This is one of the downsides of living in fairly soft human flesh, is that we're vulnerable in a number of ways. That's probably also intentional. God didn't build us with carapaces and claws and things that, I mean, we're not bulletproof, right? He made us in a way where the way that we act each other, both physically and emotionally, has significant impacts on each other. And this is part of the tuning of the equipment to show us in a physical manner what it is God is trying to teach us spiritually, which is when you act lovingly towards other people, everything goes well. When you act unlovingly towards other people, all kinds of things fall apart. So that was maybe a long tirade, but you get the point.
and just more on that, the World War II generation, the Great Depression generation, you know, things kept getting easier and easier and easier and easier. And like when I was a kid, I never saw kids I didn't see kids throwing temper tantrums and screaming and flailing around on the ground, you know, in public. Now, it's just like a more common thing. You know? It just seems like each generation just gets softer.
Well, I'm definitely getting the old man stage because I want to be like kids these days, and they don't. I will, for once, disagree with you. I actually think that the stuff that you're seeing today is exactly typical. I mean, you can go back and see all that kind of stuff in the past. I'll give you an example. Is back in the 30s, there was there are a lot of the behaviors remain the same. The acceptance of the behaviors is what changes. So in the 30s, there were a significant number of marriages that had kids 7 months after they were married, right? So it wasn't that in the 30s people were more moral and they weren't sleeping with each other necessarily. It was they were trying to keep it under under the table kind of thing. So instead, what I think has happened is it's this loop of will we start to accept it. We say it's happening anyway, we should be more accepting of it, and we start to be accepting of it, which encourages more people to do it, which means that more of it happens and that kind of, and so I think that what you see is amplification. So maybe it's the case that kids are softer than they are today, or however you want to put it. But it's amplification of stuff that had happened previously. It's also the case too, like I hear a lot of people are like, my parents just let me, I came home, I unlocked my own door, everything went fine, I wasn't supervised at all. Okay, well that may have been the case, but was there some percent, and we don't know because these data typically don't come out, what damage did that do that we're not paying attention to? What does that cause people to do? I would have probably 20 years ago said, if you're not spanking your kids, then maybe you're not, being tough enough on them. I had never spanked my kids and will never spank my kids because I've realized that you don't have to. In fact, if you are a good father, and by good, and I'm not, but if you are a really good father, then you can, you will motivate them because they are dying to look up to you. They are dying to use you as a role model. They want something to imitate. And when you have done such a good job of being what they want to imitate, when you look at them and be like, that's not how we do, buddy, that's more soul crushing than any. You got to be careful with what you say there, because you can hurt them way worse by doing that than you can by physically hurting them.
That's why we gotta agree that sometimes that helps. Like me and my brother, this is anecdotal, we still remember the time we got hit with the belt. And my dad just has to raise his voice a little bit, and we're like, okay, back, respect, don't do that type of thing. He only did that once.
Yeah, so
It's bad enough that we kind of remember, learn respect, like the hard way, literally. I'm not saying it was probably not the best way.
That's not differentiating between fear and respect. So the question is, yeah, well, yes, yeah, there's a little bit of that. And there's some people who said between being feared and respected, I'd rather be feared than respected. But I don't agree with that. I'd rather be respected than feared. And when we say, I think when the Bible says being the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, we don't mean like, I think God's going to hurt me. But by the same token, we are aware of like, oh, okay, well, he can. And if we insist upon it, he will, yes.
Israelites quite a lot, especially.
And I see that in the same way of like the worst case scenario I can possibly imagine. I used to use on Carl Blanke when he was here, when his sons and daughter were here, was what do you do if you end up in the situation where son A is pointing the gun at son B and he's about to kill him? What do you do? And this is like the worst possible situational ethical place that you can. Yeah, right. At some point, you as the father may be pulling the trigger on your own child, which is God forbid that ever happens to anybody, but you can at least understand that we put ourselves frequently in the situation where God is looking at this. Here's one child of his about to do physical harm. In fact, he let Cain kill Abel. How easy is that? When I say let, like he didn't interfere and stop him. And then it didn't turn out and wipe out Cain. Why? And why? Why can God do that? Why can God do that and not feel loss ultimately?
Because without him, we wouldn't exist. He's the reason that we're here.
He's the reason we're here in the first place, and he can also call us right back into existence when he wants to. He can raise Abel from the dead, and presumably he will. So, yeah, that's right. All right, I saw a hand up before I went off that way.
Well, I was going to say, Jesus is based off love and forgiveness and stuff, but in schools, they have transsexuals come and talk to kids, and they think that's okay, and then they have kids losing their education for having marijuana. It's so, like, we need more logic, because some kids have, like, no, like, father, they grew up with nothing. They need to know, like, what's right and wrong, not just punishment. And, like, you get kicked out for having this, but then they say, have transsexuals trying to motivate kids in school. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
Well, to the point that you're bringing, here you say, here's one set of behavior that I think is going to be harmful. Here's one set of behavior that we're putting up as something that we ought to admire and emulate. Here's another set of behavior that may be damaging, and yet we're permissive about it. All of these are the result, maybe to Peter's point, of this degradation that we do see in society. These are symptomatic of advanced stages of cancer, let's say. So any time you've got cancer, you got cancer at stage 4 just like you got cancer at stage 1. It's still the same cancer, so to speak. Its effects in the body increase over time. But it's not like the cancer changed from one species of cancer to another species of cancer, or sometimes it goes from one type into other types. But typically that type may be biologically
And it's
a distinction without a difference.
Culture says it's okay to do all this bad stuff, like the people that are famous and everything, setting bad examples for kids, and then they think it's okay to do that, and then they don't ever learn.
And this has to do with the simplest explanation in my mind of why all of this happens is there's this set of priorities of this is what one ought to do, this is what ought not to. These are the highest goals to have, these are the lowest goals to have. Man's list. Result of the garden, God's list, sorry. God's list over here. As a result of the garden, man says, I see that God has a list, I would rather make the list. Now, I will take these same categories, but I'm going to change the ranking of them into what I think is best. And when you mismatch those, that's when you see what you see here. And maybe you can say the more out of order they are, the more of the bad things that are up at the top and more of the top things that are down at the bottom, this is the worse this society gets. Maybe you could say that's the case. I think that might be the case. But all of this, I just mean to point out, all of this, and the heterosexual stuff, the homosexual stuff, the stuff that seems illogical, the stuff that is illogical. All of these are symptoms of an underlying problem, and the underlying problem is always this: whose advice in life are we listening to? Are we taking our own advice? Are we listening to the engineer and designer that made us? This is back to the car example, the Ferrari example. It seems hilariously obvious when you bring up the Ferrari case. But if you think people are like that, if you think that there are individual applications of people, if you don't think that we're all the same, and who in here believes that we're all the same? Nobody. Anywhere. Even people that say we're all the same will very quickly devolve from that into something else when you put the point to them. But if we don't think we're the same, then why doesn't it make sense to find out what your best application is and to do it? And who would know that better than God? And so that's why the only question that matters, two questions that matter is, do you believe that God exists? And are you going to listen to him or to yourself? Stephen, and then...
To carry back on what we talked about, it's like the value system kind of all skewed. Not only is the value system skewed, the reward system, the punishment system is not only tangentially collected, different people tell you different things, it's dynamic, so
Yeah.
it's constantly changing.
Right.
It's contradictory. When you're told this is good, this is good, and then the media says this is different. So you have a contradictory dynamic, constantly changing, skewed value, reward, punishment system, and we're told if you live when you live by the flesh versus by the spirit, you're told you have to maximize life
Yep.
while you're here.
Yep.
And so the way you do so is based on your flesh, and then you're stuck in this place of like shame and unmet desire. Don't know where your value is. You seek it in different places. You constantly feeling more and more empty as your system becomes more and more complex. You build this giant brain map of what you have to do to find success in life.
So, and I want to zero in on one thing that you said, not because it's more correct than the other points in my estimation, but because I understand the point that I'm going to make best because of this. We say, he points out that because, let's pretend that this is representatives of society, and each of the major categories, whatever you think that they are, of your society, and the attendant thought systems are present in each one of you. So each one of you represents some segment of society that has a particular way of looking at things, and a particular value system, which means a particular order to this list. If I do something, and I want to know, after I've done something that I think is worthy of praise, or I've done something that I think is worthy of censure, and then I'm trying to feel out, what do you think about it? Do you think I'm praiseworthy as a result? Do you think I should be censured as a result? I'm going to get different answers from different people because of their different value systems. It's a fool's errand trying to get consensus from a bunch of people that fundamentally disagree about what the values are at all. So you put in that case, you're like, yeah, of course, that's stupid. But we do that all the time. It's called middle school. It's called high school. It's called culture nowadays. It's work. It's the way that we do business. We will go to work and we will care what people around us think, when we might rate those same people at work and be like, do I care about this person's opinion? No, I'd put them at the bottom of the list. Do I care about this person's opinion? Yeah, but only on these certain things. This guy's really good at that. I'm interested in his opinion on this. This girl's really good at that. I'm interested in her opinion. Well, what do you think about their opinions about these other things? I don't care. Yet somehow we derive a lot of how well we think we're doing our job from whether or not we have universal acclaim amongst a bunch of people, probably the majority of which we don't think are well qualified to comment on how well we're doing our jobs. Why do we do that? Why do we do that? Well, it's not for, well, and they may, but they are in a position of authority underneath the one that actually matters. If you are taking your faith 100% seriously, and what I mean by that is if you're 100% consistent in your belief system, you don't actually care what other people think of your behaviors. You care about what God thinks, and then you will evaluate how good those other people are based on if you do what God thinks is the right thing, and you avoid doing what God thinks is the wrong thing, and this person over here approves of you, you will think better of them. If you do the wrong thing, and this person approves of you, you will think worse of them. And you will end up sorting people into noble and evil, good and bad, based on how they react to you doing the godly thing. That's the proper order of things in this world. And if you're not doing it that way, you're probably doing it backwards. And most of the time we do it backwards.
So
And then Peter.
the thing that kind of struck me when we're talking about like the garden and like man deciding to do it his own way, like it shouldn't shock us that we operate like this, right? Anyone who's got kids knows that like kids, like even like till I was about 35, I thought I knew everything. Like no one was gonna tell me anything. You know what I mean? And then like at some point it clicked like, hey, maybe I don't know everything, and maybe I should act as if I don't know everything. Kids are never gonna do that. Like you're gonna tell kids like, hey buddy, don't do that, and then they're gonna learn the hard way, right? That's just like, that's how kids are, right? So the only one who didn't have to do that was God, because he didn't have a God. He was him, right? He didn't have a parent. So it shouldn't shock us that we're like this, like as humans, right? This is just, it's just a fundamental, like I mean, we can call it evil, we can call it fallen nature, we can call it whatever, but like we always think that we know the best, right? And there's that constant tension.
I don't know if that's the case 100%. Now, it is the case with certain personalities. But I look to my own kids and would say, I've got one kid who is constantly turning around and saying, I heard lesson A from you. I'm now going to do lesson A. Did I do lesson A correctly? So I'm watching one person who's very much willing to be programmed. I'm watching another one who is absolutely on his own program because he's a complete nonlinear thinker. But at the end of the day, you have to say, or at least externally a nonlinear thinker, he seems to have, he was up at 4:30 this morning asking me what a gecko was. I gave him the best answer I could. There is a question of how much personality in my mind influences the way that we look at other people. I've had to learn this lesson relatively quickly. When I started to take personality tests, when they start doing all this stuff to you, which is early on in our kind of career, it became fairly apparent that I was a relatively extreme personality, and that there were not a lot of people that had my personality, and my personality tends to, like, people who have my personality apparently tend to categorize things in completely like black and white ways or extreme modes, etc. And then people who have my personality are like, yes, of course, because that's what right and wrong looks like. And then the rest of the people are like, this is the problem with people like you. And then this whole thing goes on and on and on. I don't think it's the case that kids are inherently sinful. I think that they learn it because they're apt students and we're very good teachers. Now, what I mean by inherently sinful is this. We are probably all doctrinally, and against my opinion, we're all doctrinally in agreement that we are not, either we're not born guilty of sin, or ultimately if we are, God automatically forgives it. Which, if he automatically forgives it in babies, but he doesn't automatically forgive it when we know that we're doing it, then it seems that we've somehow earned that distinction in judgment. Now, leaving that completely alone and probably just irritating people who don't hold that opinion aside, sorry, but we've been through this before. My viewpoint on it says, you've seen the 4 categories of people I think are out there: good and always good, good only if they don't see evil, evil only if they see, good only if they see evil and experience it or see it, and then can turn from it, and evil all the time no matter what. These first two categories, the second category can't be here, but the first category might be here. The first category, people who are just always good. And for those that would say, well, that's never been anybody, I'll put Enoch up there, I'll put Elijah up there, as they didn't die, and if the wages of sin is death, either God was kind of specially merciful to them, or hey, maybe it's the case that they were righteous and didn't sin. I'm not saying that is the case, I'm saying it's at least a possibility you have to think about. That God does pronounce an awful lot of people righteous in there, Daniel, Noah, Job, so it's not the case that God says there are none who are righteous, no, not one. That's a song lyric. It's something that Paul quotes, but he's quoting that about certain sets of people, both the Jews and the Gentiles, and at least in my interpretation. It's all my interpretation, right? Take it as you will. But in any case, I'm of the opinion that children are not born sinful. And I am also, like my sons right now, they are into archery. They want to shoot bows and arrows. Why? Because they're inherently archers? That's because I got 3 archery targets in my backyard, and I shoot my bow and arrow frequently because I don't know why I've decided this is something to do. I picked this up within the last year. And it is absolutely the case that kids do what their parents do because they are there to learn. To the parent, so to the advice I give to the parent, you didn't ask for advice, you were making a point, but I give this anyway. You give to the parent, and forget parents, the advice that I give to the friend and a group of friends is, do you want your friends to be more godly? Do you want your children to be more godly? Do you want your parents to be more godly? Then you be more godly. That's the way that this works. People imitate other people, sometimes role-based, oftentimes nobility-based. When people see good people doing good, we say things are inspirational. What do we mean by inspirational? This person is doing this thing, which I think is good, and it makes me want to do it because I see this person doing it. That's what it is to be inspirational, right? Be inspirational, and being inspirational is just as easy as be good. Do what God says. Obey God's commandments. Ask for His. What did God say that He will give us if we ask? What was it?
The desires of our heart.
No.
In my name?
No.
Anything you ask of me, according to my will.
Oh.
That you ask.
Okay.
That part.
Yes. Now, let's go and say,
Anything with a caveat,
yes. All right. Now, what's the caveat lead to?
according to His will.
Yes. Okay. And then when Jesus, let me ask more specifically. So yes, let me go back and say, yes, that's right. But anything is not anything. If we ask God for genocide, for the people group that we don't like, or whatever, it doesn't, and we ask it in Jesus' name, the Amalekite, that doesn't mean it's going to happen. Okay?
Why the Egyptians? Hey, please have some waves. Just
Yeah, right. So but it seemed to be in His purpose, regardless of who was asking for it. There's probably a lot of people asking for that at that point, getting chased out of the army, right? I would say, let me ask this question. When Jesus says, who of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Heavenly Father give what to those who ask Him?
The Holy Spirit.
Yes. So this is the interesting thing, is when you get to the point in your life where what you can say to God is this: what do I want most? What do I want you to give me? Lord, please give me success in my job. Lord, please give me this family. Lord, please give me this person to love. Lord, please give me fulfillment in this thing. Lord, please give me a parking space. I'm late. All of these things that we ask for. If we ask for those things, we're probably missing the point. The point that this should be is this: Lord, give me your Spirit so that I will do, not that I will know what you want me to do in this case, but that I will do what you want me to do in this case. Because it may be the case that you would like for me not to find a parking space today. Because, and I can't justify this, and certainly not in this amount of time, but with personal examples, but some of them are noteworthy and not mere coincidence. I think it's the case, when you look at the view, I take a high view of God's sovereignty. It's everything short of determinism. I think God knows everything that we will choose to do, and that he's woven it together in this insanely intricate world that we cannot even begin to fathom how deep this goes. In the same way that we can't understand how far it is to certain galaxies, like you just can't picture it no matter how smart you are or how long you think about it. Your brain's just not going to do it properly. You cannot understand how complex this world is. And that literally every choice that you make can positively or negatively influence it. And then God will take that positive or negative choice and turn it ultimately to his purpose. When you can't find a parking spot, without being flip, you can literally say, this is the will of God that I am late to work. This is the will of God that this, and there may be 4 or 5 different reasons, there may be 1,000 different reasons, there may be one different reason for that. But you should never get bent out of shape. Because everything that happens for those who love God is being worked together for good for those who love him. Not just good period, but good for you. So if you love God, everything happens in this world to you and through you and without you is for your good and the good of the others who are like you and love God. That means that the only job that you have in this world, if you want God working for your good nonstop in every possible way, what do you have to do? Love God. That's it. When you do that, the world automatically turns in some way to being about what Joel Osteen says. It's about you. It was at least for your good. And that has to do with when you integrate yourself into the world in such a way that you say, if God wants me to be late to work today, good, because it'll do good for others or for me. If God wants me to be fired today, great, because that means good for me, good for my family if they love the Lord, all this kind of stuff. Could God have gotten rid of Saul without Saul having done wrong? I'll leave that question out there, but notice this. He didn't cause David to kill Saul, did he? That's typically how kings take over from other kings. When David made the right choices, he delivered Saul into his hand, and David showed he was the more righteous king and didn't take advantage of that. And by the way, after that period, do you remember where David went? Like right after he spares Saul's life.
Did he go to the Amalekites?
He went to the Philistines within possibly weeks, months, certainly a year or two. He's now living with the enemy because Saul's going to kill me one day. This is it. God levels the play, just levels the opposition and brings David back in when David does the right things. Now, David may have said, why am I having to live this way? Why is this going on? It's so that God could righteously bring Saul to his own sticky end based on his own set of choices, not just because Saul did things once wrong and God's like, that's it, I'm wiping you out now. He didn't do that to Saul. He gave Saul chance after chance after chance after chance after chance. And if we're like, wow, he shouldn't have done that, that's given a lot of bad people a lot of bad time. Hang on, do you want God to do that for you? Do you want God to give you chance after chance after chance after chance? Then don't complain when he gives other people chance after chance after chance. You think the jerk at work that's being a real pain, that's making your life miserable and the lives of others miserable, you want them out of the way? What if you're that jerk? You want God to be like, no, I don't like this guy's attitude. Boom, fired. Is that how you want God to treat you? Then don't hope for that for other people. Hope for other people who are doing evil to come to God. Don't desire revenge, desire rescue. Don't desire justice, desire mercy. And then, this is hard for me, by the way. Justice was like my number one thing. When I was this tall, the kindergarten teacher came to my mom and was like, this kid's going to have a problem in life. A, thank you, hi. And B, what? He is absolutely overtaken with justice. If this kid takes this toy from this one, he insists that this one be given back that one and all things set right. He's not going to be doing well in this world because this world ain't like that. So that my natural inclination is towards, nope, that person took this, give it back, apologize, whatever, pay him back, etc., knock it off, or I'll punch you in the head next time. That's like natural for me. On the opposite, now, I don't necessarily want that back, right, for some reason, but I don't mind dishing it out. I have come to learn that mercy is better. And it's not that justice won't be done, but you've seen what I've said about mercy. It's the opposite of justice. I hope that in my own case, mercy will be done, not justice. I don't want justice for me. And if you don't want justice for you, be careful about wanting justice for other people without them being finally and fatally opposed to God. Once they have finally crossed that bar, that line and said, never, then desire justice. But you can't judge that. Only God knows that. So you have to leave that up to God. Now we're back to the original point. This is why you want the Spirit. Because only the Spirit can discern between those people. And that's why you want to be you do want to be God's pawn. Because God turns his pawns into kings. To mix my checker and chess metaphors.
Quick add on to what you were saying, at least I found that sometimes I think God uses the process of prayer to change our minds or to change our perspective. So there's been many cases where I've had the person who's annoying in life or whatever, I want to pray for something and I get fervent in it and I start off praying for whatever, that person to go away or for success to happen, to your will be done. And I am convinced that God somehow uses the process of prayer to somehow change what I want. Because when I start to seriously ask what God wants, all of a sudden what I start to want starts to be more consistent. I don't know how that works, but I've seen it happen, and I know that it happens when I pray consistently. If I don't, it doesn't happen, but I think there's a there.
Steve's point, there's a great reason. You're absolutely right, in my opinion. In fact, I would go to the mat on your being right on this one because of the following example. It's tempting, isn't it, to say, okay, well, if Steve's point is correct, if the real purpose of prayer, 99 times out of 100, or maybe 100 times out of 100, is to change us, not to change God's mind. Stop asking God for stuff. Just realize that what you're asking God for is stupid. Right? If that's really what prayer is about, then the Stoic should be like, okay, I'll just stop asking God for stuff. All of my prayers will be prayers of thankfulness and I'll pick and choose the parts of the Lord's Prayer that I want to execute in my daily prayer life, right? Except that, who stayed up praying all night? Yeah, right? So Jesus, who sinless, and if anybody's in tune with the Spirit of God, is probably going to be he. Then, understatement of the year, spends all night praying fervently. Fervently. Why? Well, only for one of two reasons, and maybe both reasons. One is that he recognizes that, yes, God does sometimes change his mind based on the request of the individual. I doubt Jesus would have asked, if it's possible for this cup to pass, then please do let it do so, if he didn't think that that was a possibility. He would have prayed something more like, I don't want this cup to pass, Father, please strengthen my will. And God, without him asking that, what did he do? Do you remember what's reported in the Gospels about what God did in response to Jesus' prayer?
An angel appeared.
He sent an angel to strengthen him. Oh, wow, okay, well, think about that sometime, but that's worthy of some thought. But ultimately, Jesus was asking, because sometimes the prayers of the righteous man avail much. God does, quote unquote, change his mind. He says, I'm going to do course of action A. And maybe we could say it this way. I'm going to do course of action A unless somebody asks me, this righteous man asks me to do course of action B. I so happen to know he's going to ask me to do course of action B. So I'm going to do course of action A. If and only if somebody else doesn't ask, he asks, I now change the course of action B. Did that change God's mind? Well, in the deep philosophical picture, I would turn around and say, no, not in the atemporal sense, what God intended from eternity past. Does it mean that in the temporal sense, God said, this is what's going to happen, absent any interference? Yes, and God would let that happen. We see this kind of subjunctive conditional reasoning with David. Will these guys give me up? Yes, they will give you. This town will give you up. Okay. Does that mean that that town is going to give him up? No, only if and only if he goes and stays in that town. So don't do that. David says, I'm not going to do that. And he doesn't get given up. Okay, we see that happen in Scripture. If that's the way that things work, then when Jesus is asking, he may be trying to change God's mind, or what he may also be doing is saying, what he says is at the end is, but your will be done. Now, why does he say that? He says that because he knows that God's will is greater. I can give you 3 reasons why I'm glad, sickly, that the Father, and maybe hopefully righteously, that the Father didn't listen to Christ's prayer. One, for all the people that suffered like Corrie ten Boom, or who have suffered kind of the ultimate penalty, and who can look like that Mel Gibson, Jim Caviezel picture I brought up before. You guys remember that one? Caviezel's all in Jesus's, like in the costume and blood and crown of thorns and all that stuff. And Mel Gibson's sitting next to him and his director's guy's talking to him and somebody captioned it saying, me telling Jesus about how hard my day's been, that kind of thing. So you've got that. That's one. Two, the ultimate, we understand how much God must love us to allow his son to suffer that for us. Right? I would never let somebody do that to my son for my enemies. I'm not sure I'd let anybody do that to son for my friends. I might have trouble letting somebody do that to my son for one of my other sons. But God loves us more than I love my own sons, which I would burn the world to keep those guys warm. So how is it that God loves us that much? That's the second reason I'm glad that he did it. And the third, I think, has to do with it is the ultimate justice in your face when you think about what happened there. A modern commentator describes it as the ultimate tragedy, and I'm not even sure he understands how much he's right about that. What happened there was, there's an old Jewish rabbinical thought that says, if Israel was right, when Messiah comes, if Israel is righteous, then they will receive Messiah and he will come as a conquering king. If not, then he will come in this other mode kind of thing. And that thought seems to have been borne out, or something like it. Take the ultimate, mankind, you guys think that you are the bee's knees? You think you're the best? Do you think your judgment's good? Yes. We think we know how to practice secular power. We think we know how to practice religious thought. He went to the best of the two. The Roman Empire, our law is based in Roman law, right? We still hearken back to the way things were done back in Rome. And in many ways, unconsciously today. We don't even know we do it today, but a lot of our culture comes from that. Here's one of the greatest empires in mankind's history. Here's the greatest religion in mankind's history, instituted by God. And the men in charge of both of those, the Council of the Sanhedrin and the Procurator of Rome, both tried the most innocent human being ever to walk the face of the earth, the most righteous person ever to walk the face of the earth. The person that if someone said, this guy's going to walk into your courtroom so you should judge them, the first thing that the judges should be like, I'm not even worthy of having that person in my courtroom. They're way too good for me. Case dismissed. What happened? Both of them condemn him to death. This is God's ultimate. You guys want to run the world yourself? Let's test it. Here's your test. Best person on the planet ever. How does your system judge him? You both said fail. You both said crucify him. There's prima facie evidence that you can't run this place. So stop. If nothing else should make us give up the process of governance. And hope into governance is going to bring us into righteousness in the long run. That example alone should be it. And I will put it to you today, whether we say, well, the Rome and ancient Sanhedrin, fine. Jesus comes in today, here in America, what would we do with him? We wouldn't elect him our leader. He wouldn't win the run for president, probably. We'd probably end up in jail or killed again. So I bring that up just to say, when we consider what prayer is, look to Jesus' example, and both of those are real things. And Jesus was willing to pray all night long to have his own mind changed, which means that we ought to do the same, especially when we're struggling with something. But you didn't think the answer was going to be that long to a simple remark, did you? I've got a bet with myself about how long I can stretch out an innocent question into an over-wordy answer. All right, in the interest of time, yes, sir.
You want to go to these messages? We had someone named Jeremiah Robertson.
Oh, that Jeremiah guy. No, we don't want to hear from him. Yeah, where was that one? Just kidding, Jeremiah. I'm not getting them. I must have something wrong with my feed up here. Can you read it?
Yeah. He's done two of them now. None of the commandments that God or Jesus gave were gender or sex specific. Anything gender or sex related came from man, Paul, Solomon, etc. That was from earlier on. New topic for the list. Do choices have a new positive or negative result or outcome? Can choice be positive or negative? Is there a spectrum?
Oh, he wants to go all philosophical. Yes, I do like that topic, but I'll add that one in here.
And I made a question about the Greek. What's the Greek translation? So often we get hung up on the word image and actually say is the way that's described, the word likeness or image.
This is where, so by the way, expert in nothing, as I pointed out before, really not expert in ancient Greek or Hebrew. So I'm just reading commentaries and concordances just like you guys can. So I got nothing for you other than to say, don't forget that modern American standard translations, King James, all this other, from King James forward, all of these have already bought off on a set of manuscript interpretations that are linguistically diluted one way or another. So it's hard nowadays to really get to the original meanings. And at the end of the day, a lot of reasons that you see some words in the Bible marked in a certain way, and it'll say the meaning for this word is uncertain. What they really mean there is like, we got no idea, and we're using context to try to figure it out. And so here's a word that, as far as we know, could be Horcrux, a made-up word that was made up recently. We don't know the difference. We don't have any idea what this word means, and it's put in such a place that it's hard for us to discern. The Greek translation of the Old Testament is still a Hebrew into Greek, and the ancient Hebrew does not necessarily transfer one for one into Greek, in the same way that the Greek doesn't transfer one for one into English. Everybody's famously heard the 4 words for love there, and we kind of use one word for love to mean it all in English. Same thing in ancient Hebrew, which was not as quote-unquote rich a language as ours are. It didn't have as many words. So in any case, the short answer for Jeremiah is I like to be really, really careful about saying, I have a theological question. Here's a verse that seems to speak specifically to it. And this word is the most important word in that verse to speak to it. If you can't read all of Scripture and walk away with an idea that's thematic, that says this is the major theme that God's weaving into it, then your focus is probably too narrow. And when I say too narrow, I mean like, okay, fine, look into it, but it might not be that big a deal. God would not leave like the biggest deal question down to one word's translation in one sentence. And by the way, there's a few of those. So like the word that Paul uses for hell, there's one use of that word in the entire Bible. Probably not God's intent that all of us are like, well, if we get that one right, the Hebrew to Greek for Tartarus, then yep, we probably got it. Can you imagine God working that way? Maybe he does. I doubt it. So I just throw that out there to you as the stuff that's important is probably broad themed throughout all Scripture. All right, here are our possible topics. Let's have a quick set of feedback or vote, and I'll be fast because we're past time. One of them was different Christian sects. Do we want to know the key difference between Catholicism, Protestantism, Orthodoxy? If only we had a guy that could comment on what Catholicism thinks. Maybe we'll find one someday. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, same question. We did the Bible and women a little bit and this gender and some of the gender topics, and we talked about it prior. The apparent difference between God's wrath, Old and New Testament. Homosexuality we just did. We did some of this right here, a very short version of it. There's always more room. Misinterpreted idioms. These were, I think, some pet peeves of the person that wrote this initially. But that's a broad topic. That's not my comment. That's theirs. This one, the Osteen kind of culture. Online memes, I think, really get people upset. Apparently, people thought this was Jesus. This was their response. Early church history, modern church history, biblical archaeology, and a topic that I'm completely unqualified to talk on is the key words in Koine Greek and Aramaic and Hebrew and so on. So anything in here that people overwhelmingly know they want to see next. Differences between Christian sects, Mormonism, different views on that. God's wrath, another block on evolution, creation, etc. Misinterpreted idioms, prosperity gospel, any of the histories in archaeology, or a separate topic.
Sorry, you raised your hand first.
Yeah, no, the subject that came up, especially because we were talking, is if subjective truth is in question, or objective truth is in question, how do people do ethics? And then how do you interface with people?
Okay.
Because that's what I've been wondering, and, you know, because it's like, who do they appeal to? What is appeal to? Because if the answer is nothing, then I'll just cease and desist, but there's some, like, common theme of how to do that, because it just seems hard from a logically consistent, like, hey, I literally have no idea how to talk to you.
Okay.
That was.
All right, so how to engage with people who don't believe in objective truth. Where do you get your ethics? All right, there's another topic.
I actually want to throw backing behind the misinterpreted idioms. I think that just the way we are is we will take a certain like 3 or 4 phrases and we live by those phrases. And we don't even know if we got them from the speaker, if we got them from a TV show, we thought that was the Bible. Like common phrases that we start using as scripture, or even if it's something that comes from scripture and we pull it out of context, or someone's commentary on the scripture, and then you like, if you're not suffering, you're not a Christian, that kind of thing. I think that's a good one, because that really would challenge kind of what we rehearse to ourselves and our thoughts
Okay.
to become active.
Let's say common superficial Christian approaches or worldviews, and are they right, or how does one counter them? All right.
I like the word idiom there.
Is anybody dying for one topic that insists that we have to do it next time?
Of the other ones mentioned, I thought that Mormonism was interesting.
You guys want us?
Because I
Okay.
have no idea what they believe, honestly.
I mean, I'll show it up if you look at all of them.
Okay. All right.
But I'm just one guy, so I don't want to speak for everybody.
All right. Well, what I will do, is raise your hand. Yes, sir.
I wrote this down. How is single or living single better than living married?
Aha. Yes.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Yeah. You would. Okay. I'll put that one up there too. Raise your hand if you have access to the Solid Ground Facebook page. Not this, you're a Facebook person, but raise your hand if you do. Raise your hand. Okay. If you don't, tell me personally afterwards. But I will put the list up, and we'll do our vote thing again, and then we'll go off of that one rather than try to do the vote here, which I'm historically very bad at. All right. Thank you all very much. We'll look for the vote. I'll put the list up today. Vote today, please. So if it's one of these that I need to prepare for with a little bit more than I usually do, then I will have some time to do it. Thank you very much. Have a great week. May God be with you in all of it. Pray. Pray like Jesus did. And Steve wants to. Yep.